It started with a light rain on an unassuming spring morning in April. By midday, the rain became moderate, and then was accompanied by thunder and lightning as afternoon gave way to evening and eventual nightfall. In this neck of the woods, a spring storm was normal fare, almost seasonally comforting. At least, that's what I thought until people started disappearing. Whatever the things were, they came in the night. They descended to earth. I think that's what they did, under the cloak of darkness and storm. They were like shadows, black reflections of creatures that have never lived, but yet somehow have always been. They came like a plague, a pestilence of horror, absent of all light and redemption. And the rain never seems to let up. Maybe every now and then, but mostly it's drizzling, slight, moderate, or torrential. Lots of areas are starting to flood now. Wherever these things come from, the conditions must be like this all of the time. Somehow, some way, I think it sustains them. That and our blood, flesh, and bone. According to our Sheriff Anderson, officially 11 people are missing, including one of his deputies. But that's only officially. The numbers have got to be higher. Rumors are that the same thing is happening in 2 or 3 other neighboring towns. All of the missing vanished while outside. None of them have been found. To tell you the truth, I don't think they ever will be. I have caught a glimpse of these creatures from time to time and was seized by the deepest dread imaginable. They would sometimes appear as wavering phantoms, and other times, oh my God, like man-sized lizards, green and gray scales, yellow reptilian eyes, and malevolent, grinning mouthfuls of sharp teeth. And when they take you, that's the last thing you'll ever see. I'm going to try to hold out as long as I can. I have food for at least a month, radio, generator, rifle, and ammo. Not going out that door as long as the rain is falling. Doesn't seem like they can get in, for whatever reason. It's getting dark, and rain's picking up. And they're out there now. Take my advice. If you're home now, stay there. Because if you don't, you may never see home again. I once worked as a forensic nurse in a hospital's lockup unit. We had one young lady who swore she was being haunted and abused by a demon she would call Tiberius. So many crazy things happened while she was on the unit. We go into the room, do normal care, leave, and seconds later, she'd start screaming bloody murder. We'd run into the room to find her looking like she'd been in a fight with a boxing champion. Bloody lips, black eye, markings all over her body. No one ever saw her doing these things to herself now. Things would get moved around the room seemingly by themselves. At one point, she was in protective restraints because the doctor thought she was hurting herself. There was no way she could have moved or done anything to herself while in those restraints. It just wouldn't have been physically possible. But new marks would always appear on her. Something else. Her tray or cart would be across the room, sometimes like it had been thrown or tossed and scattered onto the floor. The room was secure, so there was no way someone else was doing this. When we asked her questions, she would just say, "It was Tiberius." Sometimes we could detect terrible odors. I mean, worse than an open sewer or dead animal carcasses rotting in the sun. After she was discharged, we always had trouble with that goddamn room. If there was going to be a rapid response or code, it happened in that room. One night, a security guard reported lights blinking on and off, and something like the sound of a large animal growling. And it only happened in that room.
Keep going, keep going. Okay, that's good.
Now, before I get started with this, let me tell you right now, don't bother asking about where I live or make any attempt through social media or other means to try and track down this location. If you do, you'll be lucky if law enforcement gets you first. And trust me, with all of the black helicopters buzzing around here and the unmarked SUVs lurking about, you wouldn't get far anyway. So let me get to the point. The crazy-ass, incomprehensible, shocking point. I have dinosaurs in my backyard. Now, before you start rolling your eyes, let me try to explain. Last year in early autumn, I was out in the front yard raking leaves into little piles to burn. Now understand, the way that my house is situated, the backyard fence forms a border with a small stretch of trees that in turn borders with one of the back roads. Anyway, on that particular day, as I was raking, a strange feeling came over me. I couldn't explain it or quantify it, but I also couldn't deny it or ignore it. Something was happening in the back. And right at that moment, I heard a sound that almost shook me out of my shoes. The roar of a large animal. And I was like, what the fuck? And when I got around to the back, I stopped dead in my tracks. What I saw was some shit straight out of Land of the Lost. It was a goddamn dinosaur, walking on two legs and probably 15 feet tall. And based on what I've read and seen online, it was an Allosaurus, which by all rights should have gone extinct 145 million years ago. But now here's the thing. It seemed to appear out of nowhere, take a few steps, and vanish. But I don't mean like seeing a ghost, just appearing and then dissolving into nothing. But it seemed to step out of something, and then a few seconds later, step back into it. Now, subsequently, I had almost identical sighting scenarios of the spike-tailed, plated Stegosaurus and the crazily armored and club-tailed Ankylosaurus. Now, it's interesting to note that both Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus coexisted with Allosaurus during the late Jurassic period. I mention that because a few people have suggested or theorized that my backyard may sit on a temporal vortex, or some kind of doorway in and out of time, so to speak, and that maybe these creatures unknowingly wander in and out, and that's why they can be seen for a few seconds. Now, if any part of that is true, it would also explain the black helicopters and the strange phone calls in the middle of the night with no one on the other end. So that's the story. And it's still going on, by the way. I've even seen a few that I can't identify, but then we only know a fraction of the species that existed at that time. Only what we've seen so far in the fossil record. So who knows what may show up in my backyard next? Some time ago, a man and his wife were walking along a road on a cold and rainy night. They were soaked through and shivering, and their shoes were sticking in the mud. They were hungry, and it got dark before they got where they were going. Then they came to a big house with smoke coming out of the chimney and a light from a fire shining from the window. It was the kind of house that rich folks live in. They went round the back and knocked on the door and heard somebody say, "Come on in." So they went on in, but didn't see anyone there. What they did see was a kitchen with skillets and pots and everything needed for cooking. There was meat and lard and flour and cornmeal. There was a pot of beans smoking on the fire and a rabbit boiling in a covered pot. And it all smelled so good. But there was still nobody around for them to see. But everything was set and ready for somebody. And they'd been told to come on in, so they decided then and there that if someone was going to enjoy all that good food, it might as well be them. The woman took off her muddy shoes and peeled off her wet stockings and sat down. The man took a bucket and went out to the spring house to get fresh water for the coffee. They allowed they were going to eat those brown beans and cornbread and that Molly Cottontail and drink it all down with some good hot coffee. The man had gone outside and the woman was resting her feet when in through the door came a man with no head. He was dressed fine in a coat and vest, shoes and galoshes, breeches and a starched shirt with a high collar, but he had no head. Just a raw neck and a bloody stump. "What in the name of the Lord do you want?" said the woman. And then that man started talking with no mouth to talk. He said he was in an awful misery. He said robbers killed him for his money. He said they dug around all day in the field looking for his money, but they couldn't find it. So they took him into the cellar and buried him in 2 pieces. He said it was an awful, miserable thing, having your head buried in one place and your body in another. He said that he was hankering to get rid of that misery. And he said that other folks had been there and asked him what he wanted, but they hadn't asked him in the name of the Lord. But she had. And that's why he could tell her all about his misery. Now, about that time, the woman's husband came back, and near jumped out of his skin when he saw that raw neck standing there. The woman told the ghost who her husband was, and the Hank told who he was. And that started the whole thing all over again about how he came to be the way he was. Until that Hank said if they'd come down to the cellar with him and dig up his head, he'd be mighty grateful and would make them rich. Naturally, they said they would. And they said, "Just let us get a torch." "Don't need no torch," said the Hank. And he stuck his finger in the fire, and it lit up like a candle, bright enough to light the whole room. They went down a long way of steps until they got to the cellar. The Hank said, "Here's where my head's buried, and here's where the rest of me's buried. Y'all dig over yonder where I throw a spot of light until you touch my barrels of gold and silver money." And they dug up those barrels of gold and silver, buried under the cellar floor. And then they dug up the Hank's head and hoisted it up on the shovel. And he reached over and stuck it back on his neck. Then he took his burning finger and stuck it in a candlestick and crawled right back into the hole he'd crawled out of. And the man and the woman covered him up with dirt again. They even heard him talking again from under the ground. He said he was mighty grateful to them for burying his head and body together, and it sure did ease his misery. And he said they could have all of his land and all of his money and be as rich as he had been. So they took the candlestick and went upstairs. They washed themselves with lye soap, and the woman mixed up the cornmeal and spring water and greased the skillet with lard. She put hot coals around the skillet and on top of the lid and cooked that whole cake until it was done. The man put coffee and water in the pot and set it to boil. And they ate that supper of beans and rabbit and cornbread and coffee. And They lived in that house all of their lives and had barrels of money. And the haint with no head never came up those stairs to bother them again.
At steak and ale, it's devilish difficult to choose between one tasty morsel and another.
Come sup with us at steak and ale, where hearty dining abounds.
So they combine two delicious tastes in one, like the Prince and Pauper.
Breast of chicken, tempting and plump in a delicate marinade. A bed of rice, a pineapple slice, and a sirloin steak so tenderly made.
Prince and Pauper, the best of both worlds.
Come sup with us at steak and ale.
A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He'd recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45, but looked much older. This crazy-ass lady would sit up all night listening to Christian radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep, so I went over to her place and asked her to keep it down. She opened her door, and I got a quick peek. Her walls all had crosses painted on them in different colors, and words like Jesus and angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting no light in at all. And there was a damp, yellow, stained, 50-year-old carpet, dog shit, and cockroaches everywhere. No dog, though. I asked her to please keep it down. She just looked at me and shut the door. And then she turned up the radio even louder. The next night, I had my girlfriend staying over. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw the shadow of a person next to the bed looking at us sleeping. I thought I was hallucinating. After all, it was dark and I was tired as hell. But then the shadow started talking. It was my neighbor, this crazy, creepy-ass lady, and she was holding something in her hand. And I remember thinking, oh my fucking God. She must have broken in sometime during the night, and who knows how long she'd been standing there. You should lock your door at night, she said, and walked out. Next morning, I heard someone making strange noises below my bedroom window, and it was her. She was talking to herself in some language that I didn't recognize. She had a plastic bag in her hand, and inside that bag was the decomposed head of her dog. It was hot as hell outside, and I could smell the rotting filth in the summer air. At that point, I don't mind telling you, I was scared shitless. I thought she was obviously batshit insane. I went upstairs and knocked on another person's door and asked what the hell was going on. The guy who answered was as scared as I was. Apparently, she broke into his apartment one evening as well while he was watching TV with his kids. He got up from the couch to get a snack, only to find her behind the couch staring at him holding a goddamn power drill. And then I realized what was in her hand that night. At that stage, I was like, fuck this shit. I called the police, and they knew all about her. According to them, she was a violent schizophrenic and had not been taking her medications. But they couldn't force her or enter her apartment without her permission because she owns it. The only thing they could do was get her when she went outside. I set up for the next 2 days waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When I heard her leave one morning at 2 a.m. to go across the road to the 7-Eleven, I called the police again. They had 3 cars and a special van over there in less than 2 minutes. They restrained her and threw her in the van and drove off to some institution, I guess. I never saw her again. I'll tell you something. There was more going on there than just a crazy lady off her meds. I had nightmares for weeks after. I saw strange shadows dashing here and there. And then I would catch that same disgusting smell of that fucking rotting dog's head. The lady may be gone, but whatever tormented and plagued her is still around. Over the years, I've shared stories about strange experiences and bizarre encounters in a place called the Blackwater. It's a region of the Okefenokee Swamp that straddles the Georgia-Florida border. It's a strange place to say the least. It's a frightening place, and in some cases, terrifying and dangerous. I heard many creepy stories of it growing up. My mother and her people are from that area. I'm not certain, but I imagine that I still have some family living down in the isolated waterways and forgotten marshes. People I've never met, whose names I do not know. I once told the story of the Godalon, an alien anthropomorphic plant that for a time terrorized the deep reaches of the swamp. I spoke of the terrifying monstrosity known only as Crawler, an evil, vengeful thing which was summoned from its aquatic slumber by a Timucua shaman. That, in short, is where the name Blackwater Media came from. Even now, 2 decades into the 21st century, it's a foreboding place. There are still reports of strange, unknown things swimming in the water. Things that, by description, are primordial. Monsters from a prehistoric age trapped in time. Then there are the UFOs. Not just weird lights in the sky, but craft, saucers, discs that are seen regularly down there. It makes sense, though. Anyone who'd come here from 40 or 50 light years away would almost certainly want to have a look at that place. There are abandoned shacks here and there with rotted wood and rusted tin roofs. An occasional whispering about them being used for witches practicing dark magic, or as a daylight haven for vampires. The old folks down there still speak of wandering spirits that haunt the depths of the swamp, the ghosts of long-dead slaves, Creek or Seminole warriors, and inhuman specters, bestial, malevolent entities that never walk the earth in physical form. On nights of the full moon, the swamp air carries the sound of a strange howling beast that some describe as a murderous creature that seems part man and part wolf. Also, from time to time, a hunter will catch sight of a Bigfoot, which are believed to roam freely across the wide reaches of the peat-filled wetlands. The tribesmen and the old women of the villages have spoken of this creature, even before white men came. The Blackwater still holds secrets. There are some unfortunate souls who have entered and never come out. And it is for that reason, along with all of the others that I've mentioned, that you should consider that area a no man's land. Amy Stamatis was living a normal life as a med-flight nurse at the Baptist Health Medical Center in Little Rock, Arkansas. She had a loving husband who supported her in everything, and kids who looked to her as their hero and best friend. One day she leapt from the second story of her Searcy home, and her life fell crashing to the ground, broken as the bones in her body. She was paralyzed from the waist down, unable to work and indulge her noble passions. Strangely, she still swears she didn't jump out the window that day. It all began on a typical day at work when Stamatis was attending to a burn patient. After leaving the room to return to her station, she found herself wandering aimlessly in the halls of the hospital. A marathoner, she would soon lose her ability to walk straight. Doctors blamed it on epilepsy, schizophrenia, and porphyria, a rare chemical imbalance. But Pentecostal evangelist Cindy Lawson saw something else. Demons. As soon as she heard Stamatis' story, Lawson approached the family, buckled down to work, and banished the evil forces for good. In the year 1906, 16-year-old Clara Germana Soleil entered into a contract with the devil and confessed to it. She said that she made it at the Marion Hill School in Umzinto, South Africa, where she lived since her parents' death. Weeks after the pact, Soleil began ripping her own clothes, speaking ancient languages, and making guttural, beastly sounds. During her exorcism, her skin boiled in contact with holy water, and her body levitated several times before the eyes of 170 witnesses. According to an account, Soleil writhed and squirmed across the ground, her body limping out completely at one point, as though becoming a slithering serpent. Based on another account, she actually transformed into the serpent, if only for a few seconds. After 2 days of grueling exorcism, the girl was liberated from the devil. The pact was broken on September 11th, 1906, but not without almost killing her and the priests who were determined to salvage her soul. They succeeded, for the demons never returned. Elizabeth Knapp was a 16-year-old servant at a household of Samuel Willard, a prominent reverend in the Church of Groton, Massachusetts during the 1670s. What made Knapp's possession unique from the others was Willard's scientific approach, a point of issue for the community given the pastor's passionate teachings on damnation and divine obedience. From October 30th, 1671 until January 12th, 1672, Willard documented Knapp's deterioration, which had most of the characteristics found in other demonic possessions: fits, hallucinations, body contortions, animal sounds, a deep voice, meeting with the devil, and so on. On November 28th, Knapp had a fit that lasted for 48 hours, after which she remained in catatonia until December 8th. She confessed to being assaulted by the devil and having no recourse but to make a pact with him. At this time, Willard said that the devil talked to him through Knapp, calling him a rogue minister. Willard's next entry was dated January 10th, 1672, when the girl admitted that the devil had completely taken over her body. She had been quiet since January 15th, and Willard decided to leave the matter to the more learned, aged, and judicious. Whatever happened to the servant girl has remained a mystery to this day. In January 2005, 23-year-old Marisica Irina Corsini joined the Tanacu Monastery in Romania. Not long after, she started exhibiting strange, erratic behavior, leading to her confinement at the local psychiatric hospital. By April, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, but her brother had another explanation. He claimed he saw Satan himself entering his sister's body, which meant that his sister was in demonic possession. With monastery priest Daniel Petri Karaginu sharing the same view, an exorcism was immediately in order. Cornici herself believed she was possessed and begged the nuns to strap her down and help her. Chained to a cross, the embattled victim was anointed with holy oil and kept in the church for 3 days. She was then untied and given food before fainting and eventually expiring in an ambulance. Her death put Caragino and 4 nuns in jail for murder and depriving a person of liberty. A 2005 autopsy report said Cornici died of dehydration, exhaustion, and lack of oxygen. In 2014, experts confirmed that she had an overdose of adrenaline in the ambulance, which caused her death. The world's most widely documented demonic possession that landed in the 1936 issue of Time magazine is that of Emma Schmidt, also known by her pseudonym Anna Eklund. Schmidt was an American woman born March 23, 1882 in Switzerland and raised in a Catholic household in Marathon, Wisconsin. When she turned 14, she began taking to unspeakable sexual acts and speech and became averse to everything blessed or religious, including churches. In 1935, it was revealed that her Aunt Mina, a purported witch and lover of her father Jacob, had cast a spell on her through the food she prepared for the young girl. At the age of 30, Schmidt was exorcised for the first time by a Capuchin priest named Theophilus Reisinger. The same priest took up 2 more attempts before the demons were finally cast out on December 23, 1912, at a Franciscan sisters' convent in Erling. Schmidt herself identified the demons that possessed her: Beelzebub, Judas, Mina, and her father Jacob. It is said that Jacob cursed his own daughter for refusing to have an incestuous affair with him. Schmidt managed to live a relatively normal life after that, and died peacefully at the age of 59. How shall I begin my tale? For if great care is not taken in its telling, you'll no doubt think me a madman, though such a notion, when viewed through the kaleidoscope of the events which have thusly transpired, has at times been worthy of some consideration. My name is Washington, John Washington, having been named by my parents for the first 2 American presidents. Both of my parents, now long dead, had been slaves who escaped here to Maine from South Carolina some years before I was born. Initially, I knew nothing of slavery, its cruelty and brutality, save that which I had read in the newspaper accounts written by the correspondents who made regular visits to the port cities of Savannah and Charleston. I did know of the Freedmen's Bureau, composed of both free Negroes and good-hearted white men, who work here in Maine and in other free states, lobbying the Congress to outlaw the slave trade altogether. In any event, I had come to take employment at Whitaker's Free Press, for I had been known among my circle of acquaintances as a wordsmith of sorts, and was therefore given naturally to such a vocation. My education had been a formal one, having been schooled at the Miriam Academy for Negro Boys, and then North Point Lowell, where I received diplomas in both areas of language and philosophy. The rapport established between myself and the owners of the press, Mr. T.R. Dunhill, was of genuine warmth and congeniality. He respected my abilities and potential. Similarly, I admired his obvious prosperity and accomplishment, as well as his fervent sensibilities regarding social consciousness and responsibility. I settled into my work with general ease, and began establishing a reputation as an honorable, dependable, and industrious newspaperman. I took up residence in the city proper, a second-floor arrangement, 820 Hunter Street, with spare bed and an extra room into which I designed a study. It was a modest room, no more than 25 paces between the four walls. But the oaken bookcases, the red-bricked fireplace, and marvelous iron-latched windows summoned in my mind images of long, quiet autumn evenings with a friendly pipe, brandy, a warm fire, and volumes of Cervantes, Aesop, Shakespeare, or Homer. It was in that study, in which I have long since come to find great comfort and security, that I read the courier message that was to change my life. When the knock came at my door, it wasn't terribly late, perhaps just after 9, but it did seem an odd hour for visitors. It was a young man with a uniform and cap reading Eastern Atlantic Courier in small white stitched letters. I took the message, attended to the boy's gratuity, and closed the door, bidding the youthful messenger a good night. Returning to the study, I sat in the chair by the fire, opened the letter, and began reading. 30th August 1840. Dear John, forgive the intrusion into the privacy of your home and leisure. I did, however, regard your diligence and long-standing commitment to your vocation and your honor, and was thus obliged to inform you concerning the following. I have received word from acquaintances living upstate about a series of mysterious deaths, the details of which are unspoken. Yet some element of the bizarre is implied throughout the correspondence. It is a small farming and dairy village called Willow's End. Truth be told, I knew nothing of that part of the state, and indeed the village itself is absent from our office maps. If it is agreeable, proceed to Willow's End post-haste with the intent of uncovering the mystery. And as your journey will be some hours, I have secured horse and hansom, reserved to depart at first light tomorrow. Once there, contact a Mr. Philip Wellington, village constable. As the village does not possess a telegraph office, I will await the conclusion of your investigation in its entirety. Regards and success, T. R. Dunhill, editor, Whitaker's Free Press. Upon reading the note, I must confess some degree of exhilaration, as if I were about to embark upon some unknowable yet grand escapade through which some discovery of merit could be attributed to me. And yet I was also set uneasy, for rumors of murder and of dark omens held for me a natural foreboding of dread. And yet curiosity compelled me to consider the contents of what was before me. I felt a chill overcome me, and it was as if the knowledge of what was to come had settled down upon me like the frigid pall of death. But I knew not what was to come. I felt as though I were walking through the original garden, with the serpent slithering, unseen, underfoot, harboring some secret parcel of terror to which I would succumb. And still, the allure, the dramatic pull of a foray into the unknown was such that I hastened out of the study, down the hall to withdraw clothing from the wardrobe in preparation for the long journey to a place of which I had never heard, and from which I might never return. As I journeyed through the countryside, I took careful account of the marvelous landscape which surrounded me. All around there were elms, aspens, and maples in their late summer attire, and also shrubbery, fruit, and flowering plants of every kind, fuchsia, plum, sassafras, pawpaws, and mignonette. A small brook ran briskly just off the road to the left of me. I could see the morning sun's reflection playing and glistening against large stones which lay prominently in the shallow creek bed. The water rushed and ran white against them, causing an eye-pleasing gem-like sparkle. In total, I embraced all of the wonders of nature, that their splendor might somehow, or in some unorthodox capacity, add to my constitution in preparation for some unseen destiny. Of Willow's End I knew nothing, save that I, like Mr. Dunhill, had been unable to locate it on my map, and the other relevant facts of the matter which had been explained to me in the letter. But I did know that a small, isolated, and virtually unknown farming village would be a breeding ground for superstition and all manner of talk about wild goings-on, of spirits, hobgoblins, and haints. Given that just such a place had already been the scene of a number of strange unexplained deaths, whispers of supernatural influences, sorcerers, werewolves, and such had no doubt already taken a stronger than usual foothold and were on the increase exponentially. Nevertheless, I arrived there shortly before dusk, and I remember that in the miles preceding my destination, that the landscape had undergone a certain alteration, definite albeit subtle. The colors of the hedges and grass seemed less poignant. The sweetness of the summer blooms, which had formerly cascaded all around me, had been substituted with the unsettling hint of decaying wood, as if all the forest had fallen into some morbid vortex of dilapidation. Now, all of these things, mind you, were less obvious in that place and time than they may appear to you in my retelling of their happening. It was all in all a graduated effect, and unhindered my growing weariness of the journey. The coach stopped in front of a small wood-frame building with a sign suspended by a pair of short chains which read, "Constabulary, P. Wellington attending." The coachman assisted me to the door of the office with the larger of my 2 suitcases. As I pushed open the door, I was greeted by a large man whom I immediately took to be Constable Wellington. I saw in his expression an initial display of surprise at my being a Negro. This dissipated rapidly, indicating that he was perhaps a fair man, being a close and long-time associate of Mr. Dunhill. We shook hands and introduced ourselves, and he invited me to sit down. He offered me a drink, which I accepted gladly in hopes that it would diffuse my travel fatigue. He poured what I took to be brandy from an unlabeled bottle into a small glass. After he handed me the drink and poured himself one, he sat in a large cushioned chair behind his desk. He went on to describe to me with some reservation, I felt, that so far there had been 4 deaths. He told me that all of the bodies had been horribly mangled, as if they had been clawed and ripped, and then chewed or gnawed upon by some wild, indescribable beast. He said that basically each of the 4 bodies had been so thoroughly mauled that positive identification had only been possible through recognition by family members of the deceased's tattered clothing. And he told me more. Though their bodies were discovered in different locations, each was in some proximity to the Hampton Woods, which indeed lay directly on the northern outskirts of the village. I came to learn that many of the local folk bypass the Burgess Road by taking a trail, which carries them through Hampton and into the village. It was, in my judgment, knowledge of this shortcut, as it were, that led to the grisly demise of the 4 unfortunate persons of whom Constable Wellington had spoken. I asked the constable if it were possible to investigate the Hampton Woods. We might be able to find clues as to exactly what menace had befallen the 4 victims. Had it been a homicidal wayfarer seeking sport? A band of rogue highwaymen bent on mischief of the worst sort? Perhaps a wolf pack or a cougar had come down from the high country following the elk herds. Such things were known to have happened in the past. Having consented to my request, the constable and I set out for the Hampton Woods under the cover of night. I have often pondered many times since why we chose to do so. Why had we not gone under the protection of broad daylight? Why had we opted to venture out into the black wilderness when all of the sinister elements of creation held sway? We readied for our excursion, making all of the necessary arrangements and taking all necessary precautions. The night air was unusually chilled for that time of year, and there was a particular quality of dampness that hung like a cloak across the shoulder of the night. Constable commented on how unsettling that was to him. I silently concurred with his assessment as we entered into the Hampton Woods. Once in the woods, we saw that the fog lay incredibly thick, much more so than down in the village. All around us it swirled, blanketing us in an impenetrable white soup. Then we heard the sounds. At these sounds my blood ran cold, for they seemed to emanate from all around us as if we were surrounded by some kind of whispering horde of the damned. Like myself, the constable's eyes flashed wide with curiosity and fear. I told him that we should turn back to back, each man protecting the rear of the other in lieu of an eventual attack. The constable thought it to be a sound tactic, and as we turned our backs to one another, I saw Constable Wellington draw a pistol from his belt and assume a formidable pose. The sound was growing, all around, encircling us. Feral whispers rising into faint grunts and snarls. The constable, by all accounts a brave man, told me that no matter what might transpire, that we should give a good account of ourselves in the ensuing drama. Now the mist began to fall away, revealing masses of diminutive shadows huddled and revealed in the darkness against reflected moonlight. There were creatures all around us, scores of them. They were hideously twisted monstrosities, and an absolute terror to behold. Each one, though differing somewhat from the other, possessed horribly mottled gray skin which seemed coated with a moist film, giving the creatures an almost reptilian sheen. Their eyes, which were huge and abominable, were diamond-shaped, black and bottomless, as they no doubt contemplated unfathomable evil. The creatures bore mouths that were filled with row upon row of horrid, jagged, razor-like teeth, the edges of which oozed with rivulets of gruesome saliva. Their arms were raised in a terrifying manner, showing hands upon which were mounted furious black claws, which raked in the air and in our direction. The snarls which the beast hurled at us grew into growls, and then nightmarish wails. The attack was upon us. The constable fired into the bestial horde, which approached him furiously. Strangely, the bolt of the blast caused the things to recoil momentarily from their attack. Their brief retreat was also no doubt due in part to the reaction of having one among them hurled some yards back, and now lying dead on the ground, with a ball lodged in its gullet. Now the demeanor of the creatures took on a sense of wariness, as if they now knew that this enterprise involved an element of danger for them. Emboldened, I reached inside my cloak to the belt beneath my vest, which revealed a pistol which I had brought along unbeknownst to the constable, as our situation was untenable. He looked agreeable upon its appearance, and then I too fired into the now frenzied swarm, striking my chosen target. Constable Wellington began his onslaught, falling the grotesque ogres as they charged him. But alas, the sheer number of them was far more than our ammunition could hope to contain. As the attack continued, it became a contest of strength, of brute force, that of man versus monster. As they came on, we hurled large stones at them. Fallen branches were swung, bashing skulls, teeth, and ribs. And we used our bare hands, struggling against wicked claws and razor-sharp teeth. The world became a nightmarish whirl of evil and darkness. My mind and body were awash with the bestial contest now thrust upon me. My muscles ached with every motion. My bones rattled like so many tossed dice from the savage blows, scratches, gashes, and bites that I had taken thus far. But I held fast to the ground under my boots, for surely surrender meant certain death. And then, from somewhere in the surrounding darkness, a shot rang out, and in the midst of the great struggle one of the creatures fell. Then another shot, and another, and another. The beasts had suddenly become the hunted. Some of the men from the village, determined that the horror should end that night, had come to our rescue, ending the long nightmare of Willow's End. That is my tale, an all too terrifying and harrowing account all those years ago. To this very day I cannot ascertain from where the creatures had originated. Some said that they were demonic entities, agents of the underworld, which had come to plague mankind. There were some, mostly Indians from nearby tribes, who were said to have claimed for generations that these were creatures that had roamed the isolated dark regions of the country for centuries in a sort of dormancy, and rising only occasionally and with dark intent. Such things had also been spoken of by runaway slaves. There were many among my people to whom the old traditions of Africa had been passed, and those traditions had not faded. There had been a man named Gerard, I think. Yes, that was it. His name was Johann Gerard, and he was known in those days to be a learned man, a scholar, a man of reason, science, and philosophy. I remember having spoken to him in the company of Constable Wellington, no less. He told me that for a number of years he had practiced the science of astronomy and had become most familiar with what lay in the heavens. I remember this event specifically because he told me that he had his own theory about where the dreadful beasts had come from. He said that one night in November, as he recalled, he had been gazing at the stars through his telescope, identifying the various constellations and planets that were in the power of his lenses to view. He said that something up there had caught his eye, something unusual that he had never seen before. He thought at first that it had been a comet or a meteor, but he watched the object hurtle earthward, burning green, then blue, and then yellowish orange. He tracked the object and watched as it crashed to earth in a plume of dust and smoke. When I asked about the location of the crash, I was plummeted into a state of horror at his response. The thing, he said, crashed in the Hampton Woods. The implication that these horrid monsters had hailed from the outer reaches of the cosmos filled me with dread. What other unspeakable nightmares might await us? We are but small creatures and must thusly tread with the greatest of care with all things. And so at long last I returned home to familiar surroundings, to Mr. Whitaker's office, where I hope this story will be published, and of course to my beloved 820 Hunter Street, oaken bookcases, warm pipe, brandy, and red-bricked fireplace.
When you say but, you said a lot of things nobody else can say. When you say but, you've gone as far as you can go to get the very best. When you say but, you've said the word that means you like to do it all. When you say but, it means you want the beer that's got a taste, that's number one. When you say but, you tell the world you know what makes it all the way. When you say but, you say you care enough to only want the king of beers. There is no other one, there's only something less, because the king of beers is leading all the rest. When you say Budweiser, you've said it all.
For want of a kingdom, a curse was cast. For want of vengeance, the dead must walk. The king was dead, quite dead. In life he had been called the Great One, and indeed, the name of the king, which was Jatif, could be translated to mean something approximating jaguar lurking. His rule was such, and so was his eventual demise. Some would later say that the little dark man known as Albir was responsible for the entire affair. In part, I am inclined to agree, but that is neither here nor there, as we must not permit hearsay to compromise the truth. You see, Albir had in fact been royal vizier, and was learned in the ways of magic and all manner of mystic arts. For this reason he was held in especially high regard by the king, who in truth knew little of such matters. Now it often occurred that King Jatif would wish to consult the spirits on matters of state and on personal affairs as well, as he was known from time to display more than a portion of ineptitude in both areas. Now for this consultation, Albir served as medium. The spirits spoke through him, you see, and he delivered the messages directly to the king. Now one night King Jatif decided to consult the spirits about a situation that was making him more than a little nervous. His advisors, many of whom held ill favor with him, had told him of a kingdom which lay to the west and was seeking to expand its borders. This kingdom, he was told, had even sent out raiding parties, which were known to have marauded caravans and villages all up and down the great river. Though he knew that the treachery of some of his court knew no bounds, their words in his eyes constituted a terrible threat to his kingdom. He therefore sought the advice of the spirit world about what he should do. For want of fear, a war was waged. Now it came to pass that the armies of King Jatif swept across the western countries, destroying all who stood in their path. Blood flowed like the great river, and thousands were killed. A useless tidal wave of death inspired by a paranoid despot. The armies eventually returned, bringing gold, priceless jewels, slaves, and many other spoils of conquest. Jatif was at last satisfied, as much as one such as he could be at any given time. He assumed his kingdom was safe and believed that the newly acquired wealth would ensure prosperity for the kingdom, specifically himself, for a long, long time. One day Albir was coming out of the royal court, which had been in session all morning, when he chanced to hear some muffled references to a plot to murder the king. At this he was greatly troubled, though not entirely surprised, for he knew that there were many people who had opposed, albeit privately, the harsh and unwarranted exclusionary proclamation. He too had warned the king about the degree to which his actions had been applied, that the spirits held disdain for men of such vile ambition, that they may even in fact seek to punish him. For want of restitution, the ground opens. That night, Jatif was meditating in his private chamber when a knock came on the outer door. He ignored it at first, but thought better of it and called for a guard. Time froze. Then the silence of the night was shattered by a single ghastly scream. When the great door swung open, the king saw them, slaughtered in countless ways, some without heads or arms, some with eyes and great flanks of flesh gouged away. He saw blood running in one endless, horrific, great river. A legion of the dead. Soldiers, warriors, herdsmen, housemaids from across the Neftu, the desert from above the delta, in Unadi. Vengeful dead, come to claim justice for their butchered bodies and tortured souls. Come to add one more to their ranks. Advanced Scouting Mission, Planet Kel Prime. Blue. He couldn't believe the sand was actually blue. Commander Kyle Chaney brought his surface pod down and did a level 2 systems check. Then he did an external environmental scan. Oxygen, nitrogen content within normal parameters. After deactivating the pulse thrusters, he disengaged the restraining cable and put on his grav belt, taser rifle, and .66 caliber service revolver. He hit the hatch release, and when it slid open, a rush of welcome fresh air came pouring in. His caramel-hued face could not help but display a look of relief, albeit somewhat controlled. Blue. He saw not only that the sand was blue, but every parallel aspect of nature on Earth that was brown or black was blue on this planet. Soil, wood, stones, all fantastic shades of blue. Commander Cheney stepped back into the surface pod and activated the comm panel. Commander Cheney calling pod team. Pod team leader, go ahead, Commander. It was Jack Seffron, his second in command, his right arm on board the Starship Aurora, and his best friend. Break orbit and prepare to surface. Breaking orbit, sir. Surface cycle initiated. When the team surfaced, they immediately began cataloging environmental characteristics, soil samples, water, and air. There was some animal life present. It was pretty much as they'd expected. Birds, fish, and mammals ranging in sizes from that of a common field mouse to that of a horse. Different species than on Earth, of course, but comparable. Typical to this part of the galaxy. It was Seffron who found the tracks. They had been left where the ground was soft, headed towards a marsh area of the region. His scanner showed that they were nearly 50 centimeters in length. They were four-toed or four-clawed as near as he could tell by their shape. Seffron reached for his radio to call Cheney, and at that moment a blur of green flashed in front of him. The next thing he knew, he was looking dead into the eyes of the biggest lizard he'd ever seen. The thing, to him, resembled what a man might look like had he descended from the dinosaurs instead of the apes. Highly evolved, bipedal reptiles were rare. In fact, the zoological data tapes only registered 3 similar species in the entire galaxy. The creature picked up Seffron by the collar of his outjacket and pulled him close to its mouth, which was filled with rows of dagger-like teeth. At that moment, Seffron used both feet and kicked the creature directly in its abdomen. The creature dropped Seffron, all 6'4", 220 pounds of him, to the ground and doubled over. Seffron pulled his pistol and fired twice, hitting the creature in the chest and thigh. The thing buckled and collapsed to the ground. He went over to it and saw that its chest was still rising and falling in the act of respiration. He saw that its blood was a deep shade of yellow, almost gold, and it streamed only lightly where the charges had struck home. From his field medikit, he applied a vitazine spray to stabilize the creature's nervous system. Though he had shot the thing in self-defense and would have done so again in a similar situation, his regard for sentient life had remained intact. He radioed Commander Cheney and alerted him to the situation. Cheney immediately communicated to the rest of the surface team to be especially careful, that there was a bipedal reptilian predator native to this planet, not filed on the encyclodiscs. Party to keep disruptor power packs fully charged. Move only in pairs. Reconnaissance retrieval was not due for another 13 hours. Commander Cheney ordered laser flares away. I stood nearby, but obscurely, away from the crowd, hidden from them by their own absorption into remorse as the priest made his final remarks over the small coffin. It was a beautiful piece of art, made of steel with a beautiful powdered blue brush finish, adorned with gold-plated ornaments on the corners and every curve of its shape. Around the edges and equally spaced were small, intricately detailed mermaid ornaments around the entire body of the coffin. It would have appeared that the wee lass was a fan of mermaids. Interestingly enough, mermaids were not the kind, loving creature children's fairy tale authors would have one believe. In fact, they were just the opposite. Aquatic beasts who would lure seamen toward rocks and sandbars in an effort to shipwreck them. In fact, Yes, I'm sorry. I do tend to get off track a bit. On top of the small decorative box was a splash of roses, bright yellow and swimming in a pool of baby breath. Close, a man stood in his long black coat, holding a woman who shared the same black in her attire. Her face, though covered with a veil, carried a sad countenance, and the soft sounds of weeping could be heard escaping her lips from behind the dark curtain hanging from her hat. Between those weeping sounds, short, shallow gasps as her upper body went through the spasms of her pain-driven crying. The man's fedora was pulled low and had drops dripping from the brim as the rain from the sky cut through the air and pelted on him. It was difficult to tell whether it was rain or tears that caused the cheeks to shine beneath the dark circles of his eyes as he held the woman tightly beneath his arm and his hand gently but firmly giving a comforting squeeze to her arm. I looked away from the couple, respectfully taking my curious gaze from them and down. I noticed the same drops that were clinging from the brim of his hat were also beating up on my freshly polished wingtips. The water could not seep through that fresh coat of kiwi boot polish I had just worked into them earlier that morning. I took pride in the appearance of my shoes. It tells a lot about a man, you know? Anyway, I looked back on the scene for moments that seemed like hours and watched the family and friends as they greeted the couple with condolences and the crowd slowly diminished. Eventually, the man pulled the woman away from the site and walked her back to the awaiting coach. They disappeared into the back seat, and the steeds pulled it away through the narrow, snaking path through the cemetery. It is always the saddest moment, you know, riding away from this resting place, leaving the remnant of a loved one that shall never grace your presence again. It reminds me of another time. I'm sorry? Yes, I'm getting to that. You see, that is when it began, this ringing. I completed my task of lowering the tiny coffin into the grave and completely filled in the grave with fresh soil that had been taken from that hole just hours before. The sod was carefully placed back onto the loose soil, and there was no need to water considering the rain that had fallen on the pieces of grass as they waited their resting home. I stood and looked at the grave for a moment and marveled at how beautiful it had been put back together. The headstone of little Angela was a fine piece of craftsmanship and deserved to be complimented by an equally impressive manicured grave. You know that the marble from that particular headstone was of the finest and was imported from... Yes, I do apologize. So it was shortly after that. I was repairing the gravesite of this precious angel when the ringing began. I would say that it was the very next day. I'd put so much work into this grave, and it pained me so that it was in such a state in just 2 days. The grass sod was disheveled a bit, and the earth was soft, as if it had been moved. Erosion after heavy rains is always a risk in these places, because of such heavy foot traffic on a daily basis. Yes, I'm sorry. The ringing. It was, well, I found it odd. It had been many years since I had heard a ringing like that in my ears. It was, in fact, the very sound, the ringing, that the voices gave way to. What's that? Voices? Absolutely. From as far back as I can remember, I could hear the voices, sometimes so faint that I could not make them out, little more than whispers. Statements, explanations, rhetorical questions filled my head. You ask me if they scared me? No. I was never in a state of terror from these voices. They were sometimes soothing at times when I was facing some of the situations in my home that I'd really prefer not to delve into at this time. It is fairly common knowledge anyway that my father was a savage man, and his cruel and brutal actions eventually led to the death of a man whom he bludgeoned with his own hands. I remember thinking, at least that fellow's beatings are over at the time. But that's another story. You ask me if I ever spoke back to the voices? Good Lord, no. At least not at first. In fact, I tried to ignore them as they became increasingly disturbing to me in the things they pointed out and the things they were encouraging. What? Oh yes, forgive me. Back to the ringing. It began as a faint psee in my ears. So much that I thought, how in the world am I hearing a dog whistle, and looked around me to make sure there were no hounds frantically searching for their master. It had been many years since I heard the voices, which eventually died down to just a little more than a ring. similar to this one. It did go away, so I continued with my work. I take a great deal of pride in the grave sites, you know. It is very important for the families of those who have passed to find the resting place of their loved ones clean and well manicured. There can be many problems encountered in maintaining the estate grounds, from improper fertilization, erosion, as I mentioned, bare spots, dense weeds, but all have to do with neglect, which oh yes, I'm sorry. Where was I? Oh yes. So I continued to work, and I was kneeling down over the little angel site when the ringing started to transform. Suddenly it went from the steady pszzz to more of a ding ding ding. Well, I knew immediately what it was. As in the cemetery, there are no dinner bells, so it most certainly had to be one of the security bells on a buried coffin. I stopped picking the weeds momentarily and sat perfectly still, and the ringing stopped. I looked around the grounds, and no more than a stone's throw away, there was a gathering of 4 or 5 people visiting a headstone, placing flowers. Did you know that ancient Rome began placing flowers on the grave sites to give comfort to the spirits who they believed circled around the graves? And before that, it dates back as far as... Yes, I do apologize. So I looked to the gathering of people and noticed that they were not fazed at all by the ringing. They were all focused on the headstone. The women were placing kerchiefs to their noses, and the men were hanging their heads, pretending to have sorrow to comfort them. Looking back to the grave, I had repaired it back to its original state. I stood, wiping my hands, and picked the tamp from its resting place on the headstone. To properly take care of sod on these sites, you would really ideally need a sod roller. But with such confined space throughout the property, I find it easier to use the tamp. I began tamping the sod back firmly into the soil when I heard it again. I stopped, looked around. It was louder this time, certainly loud enough for the nearby visitors to hear. I looked towards them, and they were oblivious to the sound. I called towards them. "Excuse me," I yelled. I had to yell it twice, and finally one man turned to see me, and then the others peered over to me. "Sir, do you hear that?" I know that he at least heard me, but he looked at his friends, and they were whispering and shaking their heads. He turned back to me and unsurely shook his head back at me with a slight shrug of his shoulders. The 2 women stood behind the men, as if I was threatening to them. "Sir," I said, "I hate to bother you, but do any of you hear that?" "Hear what?" he asked, frowning, as if he were confused. "That!" I pointed to the air as if to catch one of the sound waves. "That ringing. Do you hear that?" The young man looked at the others, who looked at him in slight confusion and shook their head. He looked at me and shook his head. No, sir, we don't hear anything." "That's absurd," I said more firmly now. I began to say something else when I realized that the ringing had stopped. I looked at the 2 couples who were staring at me, and I looked around, back at little Angel's grave. I strained my eyes, as if that would sharpen my hearing. Nothing. The ringing had stopped. I looked back at the 2 couples. The man who had spoken was looking at me with his head cocked to one side. "Sir," he said, "are you okay?" Yes, of course," I replied. "I suppose I've been working way too many hours this week," I replied and chuckled to relieve them of their concern. My day was over, and it was time for me to go home. Margaret would expect me. She knew my schedule, and it was like clockwork. After I placed my tools back in the shed, I locked up and began walking towards the gates that opened to Broad Street. I live just a block away on, well, you know where I live, of course. Yes, of course, the story. I do apologize. As I said, I left for home that afternoon and really thought nothing more about the ringing. Time? I believe it was around 6 p.m. or shortly after. I know that it was late because I recalled it odd that Margaret was not home when I arrived. This was particularly frustrating for me because she always has my dinner cooked, and this was not the case on this day. I pulled out some leftovers, and after adequately stuffing myself from the pork loin from the previous night, I laid on the sofa and fell asleep. No, sir. That was it. I slept through the night and actually woke up a little late. I had to rush to prepare for work and actually didn't even have time to shave properly, nor did I have time to shine my shoes.
It is very important the shoes carry that gleam. You know, you can tell a lot about a man by how he keeps his shoes. I've actually seen men in the past that... Yes, I'm sorry. So I go on to work and to the maintenance office where I pick up the schedule for the day. There was a burial schedule for later that afternoon in the F section, so I had time to work the grounds before getting that site prepared. And that was my routine typically. You know, the groundskeeping is very important. I take a great deal of pride in the grave sites, you know. It is very important for the families of those who have passed to find... Yes, perhaps I have said that. Well, I began my rounds, walking through the grounds and making sure they were clean of debris and trash. I typically will stop if I see weeds growing in the grass of the sites. I'm very meticulous in taking special care. Dense weeds are just one problem one can encounter with ground maintenance. Improper fertilization, erosion, and basically just neglect can lead... Yes, I'm sorry. Sometimes my mind wanders. So I was working the ground of Gladys Morris, 1795 to 1825. If you ask me, far too young to die. I remember her service and how sad it was that there was but one soul there, her husband, and he... I'm sorry. So I was working the grounds of Gladys when I heard the faint ringing again. I rose from my knees and glanced around in an effort to assess where the ringing was coming from. But I already knew. I walked towards the gravesite of little Angela and realized that it was, in fact, coming from there. Now, as you know, the security bells are there for a purpose, but I'm quite sure from the type of trauma this little girl suffered, there was no chance that she had been erroneously pronounced dead and buried alive. I looked around for someone, anyone, that could possibly confirm what I was hearing. I saw John walking towards the section and yelled for him. I'm sorry? Yes, John is one of our custodial staff. A rather large black man, but nice chap. Unfortunately not very well educated, nor articulate. Rather strong fellow, though. I once saw him alone take the end of a... Yes, of course. So John recognized that I was hailing him and walked to the gravesite of Angela. I looked at him inquisitively as he stared back at me. What do you make of that, John? I asked him. Make of what, sir? He responded. That ringing, John. Certainly he could hear the ringing. What ringing, Mr. K? John called me Mr. K, or Mr. K, as his dialect was, mostly because my last name is so unique to some. I can actually remember when I was a young lad in grade school, the teacher... Yes, sir. I apologize. So I asked John if he could not hear that ringing. No, sir. He shook his head. I don't hear no ringing. I know that he could see I was shocked, and I looked to Angela's grave and held my hand out to the grave and looked back to him. He looked at me with a perplexed look. He looked to the grave and back to me again and shook his head. Mr. K, you all right? John was such a gentle man, a gentle giant. At any rate, I told John, yes, I was fine, and to run along and apologize for interfering with his duties. But the ringing, oh my heavens. It just continued over and over. I looked around to see if there was anyone else, and there was not a soul in sight. But the ringing persisted. I knelt down onto little Angela's resting place and put my ear close to the grass. It was definitely coming from her coffin, and I was horrified. Could it be? Could the physician have made such a grave error in pronouncing this little angel dead? Was she ringing the security bell with her tiny hands? I stood and decided something must be done about this. I went to the maintenance office, which is a good 75 yards away from lot 467, which is the site of little Angela. I was in a rush to find someone, but was careful not to trample the grass of the clients. There's enough walk traffic through the property without me adding more damage to some of the sites. You know, combined with erosion and improper fertilization due to budgets, we must take special care to ensure these... Yes, again, I apologize. So I arrived at the maintenance office of Mr. Hardy. He's the shift supervisor. He was in a conference with 2 vendors. We get vendors quite frequently who ask for referrals for their custom headstones, flowers, and a multitude of, yes, okay. So as I burst into the room, Mr. Hardy and the 2 guests appeared startled. I suppose I did come rather abruptly. I began to tell him the situation, but Mr. Hardy held his finger up to me and gave me a condescending look to silence me. I stepped back and waited on him to finish his conversation with the two salesmen. As the two vendors left the office and closed the door behind them, I stepped forward to speak, but Mr. Hardy raised his finger at me again. "Corindak," he said as his eyes looked me up and down, "have you looked at yourself in the mirror today?" Well, I'm sure I did not know where this was headed. As I stated, I was running late this particular morning and surely did not look at myself in the mirror. "Sir?" I asked. "Look at you," he said. "You haven't shaved and are looking quite unkempt there. Your clothes look like you slept in them." As he looked at my feet and back to my face, "And your shoes, man. It looks like you've scuffed them up with fudge." He shook his head. "Don't you have a burial at 3 today?" "Yes," I told him. "Yes, I do, but sir, there is a bell ringing from lot 467. He looked at me with a confused look. 467? Who? "I don't know that lot." He looked at his ledger and flipped through the pages. I watched as he drug his fat, stubby index finger down the column to find the information. He found it and without lifting his head looked at me over the rim of his glasses, which were resting on the end of his nose. He looked up and removed his glasses. "Corindak, you do know what happened to that little girl. There is absolutely no way this was an error. The family was unable to even do an open coffin ceremony. They weren't even able to do post-mortem photographs." Yes, I know. "But nonetheless, sir, there is a ringing coming from that lot." He stared at me for a moment, looking me down with his eyes again to my feet and back up to my eyes. "Okay," he said, grabbing his hat from the rack hanging beside his desk. "I'm going to come out there with you so we can settle this. And then you're going to get yourself straightened up and cleaned up for that service this afternoon. We can't have our clients' families seeing our staff looking like vagabonds at their services." So together we walked across the property, carefully navigating the resting sites of the beloved. I'm always careful to stay off of the grass, as it's hard to keep up. We have a great deal of foot traffic through this property, and combined with the erosion and, oh yes, you're right, I do drift. So we walk the 75 yards, and as we near the grave site, it comes again, the ringing. I look to Mr. Hardy with a hesitant and slight grin. He returned a smirk to me with his fat jowls, causing my grin to disappear. We got to the site of little Angela, and the ringing was loud, over and over again. I looked at Mr. Hardy, waiting on him to respond. He just stared at me. I looked at him as his thick neck spilled over his collar. He had the nerve to say something about my appearance as he stood there with his shirt barely able to stay tucked in his over-barrel belly and a mustard stain on the front of his tie. And I'm unsure if the stain was even from today. It could have been, yes, sorry. "Well," he said, shrugging his shoulders, "I'm here." The ringing was fading a little, but it was still audible, over and over. "Do you not hear that?" I said. "Here," I said, kneeling down on the grass, which was still soft from the repair I had done the previous day, but was looking a lot better. "Here, do you not hear it?" "Corindak," he looked at me with his hands on his hips as his belly lapped over his belt. "I don't hear anything. There is no bell. That little girl is dead, D-E-A-D. You got it? Now, you got half an hour before the service, so you need to get your ass cleaned up and shaven, or you will find yourself without a job come tomorrow. You got it?" He turned and walked away. I thought to myself, that fat fuck. I was so angry as I watched him waddle away, trampling on the nearby resting sites, that I didn't even realize that the ringing had stopped. I was actually more concerned with him damaging the grass of the patrons. At any rate, the ringing had stopped, and I lifted myself up and wiped off the leg of my trousers. I went back to my locker and was able to find a razor and did a dry shave in the bathroom. There was little I could do about the condition of my clothes other than just straighten them out by hand. I did take some paper towels and wipe my shoes off the dirt. I really found it odd that there was so much dirt on my shoes and actually caked around my soles. I'd been repairing some of the grave sites, but I didn't think I'd been in that much soil. I wiped the shoes clean, and though I didn't have my kiwi polish with me, I was able to get them at least to acceptable cleanliness, though not the normal shine that I have. I worked the service at 3 and as the family was carried away in the coach and the sounds of the horse hoofs were out of earshot, I began closing this grave. By the time I put up my tools in the maintenance shed, it was past quitting time, and as I began my walk towards the gates on Broad Street, I could see the light on in the maintenance office, realizing that Mr. Hardy was putting in a late night. What? No, sir, I did not stop to speak. In fact, I didn't go anywhere near the office. I made my way to the gates and to my home. I live just a block away, and I'm sure that Margaret would be waiting for me. I would not share with her the encounter with Mr. Hardy, as sometimes she seemed to defend him over me in my grievances with my supervisor. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn that they may have had some kind of inappropriate activity between them. But that was neither here nor there with this story. I arrived home a little after 6 p.m. Again, Margaret was not yet home, and I suspected she'd been visiting her mother on the east side. The truth of the matter is, we've been quarreling for a while, but lately it'd become worse. You see, we had a daughter several years ago that got the fever and passed away. Little Maggie was just 4 years old. I suspected that she was becoming ill because she'd been acting a little under the weather and not her normal self. I had asked Margaret to have Dr. Giles, he's our physician, come by and see her. I thought she'd done it. Maggie began to develop a rash over her little face, and within days the fever was so high that she felt like a broiler to the touch. Dr. Giles came by and gave us a grim report, and within days little Maggie had left to be with the Lord. It was only days after that I found that Margaret had not reached out to Dr. Giles to come see Maggie. She felt distraught over it, blaming herself. I tried to console her and tell her that the Lord would probably forgive her for her neglect, but nevertheless it was difficult to overcome. Since that time, our relationship has not quite been the same. She seems to run to her mother, who manages to pet her and make her feel comfortable, and I no longer fight her desire to be absent. But I digress.
When I got to the gates, there were a few people passing on Broad. I stopped the first couple I saw, pleading with them. They backed away from me like I was a madman or something. I actually think they looked afraid. That was totally absurd. I pleaded my case with them. What? No, of course not. I didn't touch them. The man put his arm around the woman and they backed away as if they were in danger or something. As they moved along quickly, I turned looking for someone, anyone, who could help me. Another gentleman coming walking towards me noticed me immediately and went to navigate around me, but I stopped him. I started to tell him the story about the ringing, over and over. He looked at me as the other couple did, like I was a madman. He turned to walk away, but I grabbed his coat sleeve and pleaded. He told me to get my filthy, stinking hands off of him and snatched away, brushing his coat off as he walked away. Sir? No. I would say that I approached 3 more people, all with the same results. The ringing was louder and even more intense. I could hear it from the gates. I kept pleading with passers-by, "Don't you hear that? Please help. She is alive." But no one would listen. They all just stared at me like a freak. They looked at me with the same look that adulterous pig had looked at me with the day before. And the ringing would not stop. Over and over. I could no longer stand it. I surrendered my efforts to solicit help from the street and ran back into the cemetery. I ran through the lots as the crow flies and bumped my knee on a headstone. I looked, and sure enough, I had torn a hole in the leg of my trousers. From what? Why, yes, I did. I know I don't normally cross grave sites, but this was urgent. I had no choice, and I knew I could repair the sites tomorrow. The closer I got to little Angela's grave, the louder it got, that maddening ringing in my ears, over and over. I pounced down onto the grave and began tearing the loose grass away. I could tell this site had been tampered with, as the grass was not even rooting into the soil. My tools were close, but I could not stop to get them. I had to get this site open. I continued to dig. The moist and loose soil began to stick beneath my fingernails, staining them like dried blood. It was odd to me that the soil was too soft, seeing that this particular grave was several days old now, and we had not had rain since the first night.
I heard my name being called and was startled when John's hand grabbed my shoulder. "Mr. K," he said. "Mr. K, what are you doing?" and he tried to pull me, lightly. John is such a gentle man, you know, but my arm, I pulled away and regret that I lashed out at him, knocking him backwards. Yes, I did intentionally push him away. At any rate, he didn't bother me again. And the ringing, that terrible ringing, continued in my head, over and over. I had dug as much as I could with my hands and reached over the ground and grabbed my short shovel. I looked at him. John was laying on the ground and found it odd that he wasn't moving. I continued to work with the shovel this time. I was a good 4 feet into the hole when I heard your officers yelling at me. They kept yelling at me, Sir, you need to stop and come out of the hole. I looked at them as I continued to dig the loose dirt away. Can't you hear that? I screamed at them. Sir, you need to stop now, they commanded, but I ignored them and continued to dig. One of the lads jumped into the hole with me and grabbed my arm. I pulled away and turned to face him. He had his club pulled out, ready to hit me. I couldn't believe I was being assaulted by an officer. I pleaded with him to step away, but he would not. He persisted that I stop and get out of the hole. He reached to grab my arm again, and I had no choice. I hit him across the face with my shovel. He immediately dropped to the ground. I moved him away and began digging again. His partner began blowing that whistle loudly, yelling for help. Now I had to deal with the ringing of that damn bell and that bloody whistle. Within moments, I began to hit something, and it was not a coffin. In fact, I was a little more than 4.5 feet into this grave, and the coffin was a good 6 feet down. I pushed the shovel into whatever this object was, and it felt somewhat squishy and soft. I tossed the shovel down and got on my knees and began to hand dig again. I saw his fat, balding head first. It was no wonder I felt it was something squishy. It was that sow of a man, Terrell Hardy, that I was uncovering. He was on his side and appeared to be dressed in the same clothes that he was in the previous day. In fact, I'm sure of it because the slob still had the tie with the mustard stain on it. I had to brush off the dirt to make sure. He was laying a little odd, and I noticed a hand on his chest that certainly could not have been his. So I began digging some more. I uncovered the dirt and began tossing it back into the officer, who was still unconscious from... Yes. So I continued uncovering the body belonging to this mysterious hand, and I recognized it at once. It was the locket that I had given her on our first anniversary, and inside it a photo of her and of little Maggie. At one time, I had held that place where her photo was, but she had replaced my face with her own. It was Margaret, and it was no wonder that I had not seen her for 2 days. It was about that time that you and your other partners had arrived. I looked up out of the hole and realized the ringing had stopped. The sound of the bell was gone. Something told me that there was something wrong here, that there was something that needed to be uncovered. Poor Margaret, never able to forgive herself for the death of little Maggie, turning to this fat lard of a man for comfort instead of me. I can't say that I have any animosity towards whomever committed this absolute heinous crime, but I'm certainly glad that you fellows were there to see this discovered. And even more so, I'm glad that the terrible ringing, that terrible ringing over and over again inside my head, is now gone. There are, I insist, such things as werewolves. Trust me, I'm an expert in matters like this. I've done a lot, and I mean a lot of damn reading on the subject. You see, the thing is, we've all been kind of conditioned. Well, to tell you the truth, fucking programmed is more like it. to accept some things as real and some things as fantasy. And I'm telling you right here and now that that kind of reasoning has deceived humanity to the extent that none of us, and make no mistake, I mean none of us, can ever trust our individual nor our collective definitions of reality. Anyway, remember last year around this time when Glenn Hullins was killed out by Lake Hargrove? Had his goddamn throat torn out, stomach and chest ripped open. Messy business all the way around. Messy. Story even made in some of them big city newspapers, Miami, Atlanta, New Orleans. After the cleanup, cops came up with no leads, no suspects, no nothing. Dumbass deputy dog police. They didn't even take notice of the moon phases. Hey, I almost forgot. What about Renee Hughes, Betty Lang, and Christina Perez? Back in June, or what was left of them, was found at a campsite up in the mountains. It was a damn shame. 2 of the girls were missing their heads, which, by the way, were never found. The Perez girl was, let's just say that for the county medical examiner, her body was a lot more difficult to deal with than the other 2. Okay, let's review. 4 deaths, 2 full moons. I tell you, some people just don't get it. Eventually, the state and federal boys got involved. Now, if you've ever wanted to see a bunch of rednecks tripping over each other and screwing up an investigation, this would have been the show for you. It was an all-timer. They brought out the horses and dogs, the choppers, and the sworn-in on-the-spot local hick deputies that are always part of situations like that. Anyhow, it didn't matter about all that when you stop and consider that none of those damn Einsteins knew what they were looking for. It never even entered their minds that all the deaths might be the work of a lycanthrope. Anyway, I, of course, knew exactly what was going on. Like I said before, I study this kind of stuff. I clipped all the stories in the papers and, get this, I even taped the reports off the TV and radio. The killings continued. In August, Willie Stelliford, 44-year-old guy of Farm Creek, Alabama, was found disemboweled in the middle of his own cotton field. Then in September, Nelson Weaver, 28, of Fremont, Georgia, was wheeling his way down Route 39 on his Harley. It was late and he was trying to make up some time that he lost when his bike had shut off on him in Regent Circle. All the damn thing needed was a new spark plug. A $2 spark plug. That's how much his life ended up costing. As he came onto the Wilmington Bridge, he saw the thing dart out in the middle of the road. He tried to stop or at least slow down and turn around, but only succeeded in skidding out of control. From that point on, the matter was purely academic. The animal thing bit savagely into his arm, and Nelson felt his world sink into a fiery sea of searing pain and blood. Luckily, he bled to death. You know, of course, that Nelson lived, he would eventually have become just like his attacker. See? I know all about this stuff. Anyway, the police are still looking. They'll probably never come up with anything, and we'll have to close the investigation until the next death. And there will be a next one. They could come and ask me for help, but they probably won't, because police already know everything there is to know about everything, right? Well, it's getting kind of late, and I've got to get out of here. Got to have some time to myself. Can't sit here chatting with you all night. Got a little bit of a headache. I get them from time to time, you know. Need to get some fresh night air. Besides, I'm hungry. And tonight, there's a full moon. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. Journal entry, August 1856. The following is a true and accurate account of the events surrounding myself and the clipper, Mercury, her captain and the crew in July 1851. Although the event lies now 5 years in the past, it was an experience in which, for me, the true nature of terror and anguish of the human soul
was realized with devastating finality. To say that the sun, while at sea, is unbearable would not only be a tremendous understatement, but would rather in any acknowledged high court be grounds for the admission of insanity. My name is Richard Armstrong Kent. This is my 11th day at sea, and I will confess to you that this sun is maddening. There has scarcely been an hour when I did not feel my very sanity being pulled away from me, as if it were not my own. As though my very soul was suddenly ripped from my body and cast beyond the dark veil. Today is Thursday, I think, and if that were so, it would be the 16th of July, 1851. I must, as I am determined, get these words down while my mind remains intact. This, I fear, shall not be the case for much longer, for the salt and surf and unforgiving heat are wreaking all manner of damnation down upon me. But I will try nonetheless. If my memory has not failed me, we set sail 13 days ago out of Moresby, New Guinea, aboard the clipper Mercury that was bound for Invercargill, New Zealand. My firm, the Worthington, Hammond and Furneaux Company, had secured freight and passage aboard the ship. I was chief agent of export and had been dispatched along with my staff to investigate potential market expansion into exotic herbs, tobacco, and textiles. Commanding the Mercury was Captain Josiah Wells, a Negro, as was I, but American by birth. It was in him that I felt a certain and inevitable bond. Though my own birthplace of Barrow Creek, Australia, was, it seemed, both symbolically and literally a world away. I admired him nonetheless, and even liked him, for in him I saw everything that a man of color could be. It was perhaps this, more than anything else, that made the horror which followed thereafter that much more poignant. Our first day and night at sea was calm and uneventful. It seemed that everyone aboard was in good spirits, save one, the captain's first mate, whom we knew as Ferrer. He was heard by my ears only making low, mumbled references to himself about the dangerous waters surrounding the Coral Sea Islands and about some obscure legend held by the natives of New Caledonia. Of this matter I invested little attention and was, for all intents and purposes, completely engrossed in the various duties that my new post demanded. I busied myself with preliminary duty applications and export license requisitions. By sunset on the second day, we were approaching the Lihu Reefs, and I was on deck looking out at the scarlet horizon. I closed my eyes and allowed my nostrils to engulf the warm, salty South Pacific air, when a scream rattled and shook the very wood beneath my feet. The scream, I determined, had come from the starboard end of the ship, and I dashed wildly to where I thought the madness had originated. I tripped on a rope coiled up in the passageway as I passed the bridge, but was able somehow to maintain enough balance to keep from falling. When I stopped, and I choose my words here with great care so that this account will be accurate and beyond challenge. When I stopped, I beheld a scene which truly threatened to push me over into the realm of utter madness. The thing, and this is a word that I must use for lack of any sensible point of comparison, the thing was immense, being larger than any man, and I immediately estimated its height to be at least 8 feet. But further, I would describe it as having a thick, rubbery skin that was drab gray and seemed to be covered with some bizarre secretion, which brought to mind the image of an eel wiggling in fisher gloves. But nothing else about it was eel-like in any way. Its eyes were yellow and hideous, for they bulged in an obvious fit of rage. Its arms and legs were thin, but not frail, for I watched it hurl men, seamen at that, around like so many discarded paper sacks. Such was the beast's strength that some men died upon impact with the bulkhead or on the deck as their very bones were shattered and pulverized to the consistency of sand. Then I saw Captain Wells, his tall frame at its most formidable. He faced the thing in a remarkable display of fearless spite. Wells wielded his pistol and fired into the beast's midsection. Clearly the captain's aim was true, for the thing screamed in contemptible fury and rushed at Wells. The captain got off 2 more shots, and of the success of these I cannot speak, for the captain was taken. Not easily at first, for his own strength gave the beast cause to hesitate. But he was overcome and hurled into the sea with such ferocity that I could only think him dead. I saw that 4 crewmen lay dead or dying on deck, but I did not know how many, if any, save the captain, had been thrown overboard. My staff, Togan and Whitebush, were among the missing, and I feared them drowned, either by the beast's hands or of their own free will. Neither was outside the realm of possibility. I tried to think, tried to gather my thoughts. The creature was still raging, still smashing and wreaking havoc, giving no quarter. Then something occurred to me. Considering the unimaginable depths that the creature must have risen from, it would most likely be highly resilient to attacks of bullets, blades, or fists. Its anatomy was no doubt adapted to withstand the rigorous pressure of unknowable fathoms. On the other hand, its vision was assuredly adapted to a near lightless environment. Certainly the flame from one of the watch lanterns would allow me to keep the wretched thing at bay. I think perhaps that madness set in at that point, for little else could have inspired me to concoct such an ill-fated scheme, albeit from a clearly hellish situation. With fertile trepidation I followed the path of seething destruction left behind by the creature. There were twisted metal beams, shredded net portions, and pummeled, shapeless masses that had once been men. I found the beast just below deck, plundering and destroying as it had above. I decided that this was the moment to act. I yelled, getting the creature's instantaneous attention. Its quickness startled me, for its agility did not in any way correspond to its size. The beast came at me at an alarming pace, and I made for the deck with the dispatch of the ship's namesake. Once on deck, I faced the thing, though in retrospect I know that certainly my confrontation was unworthy of that of Captain Wells, whom I had so admired. And when our eyes met, mine and the creature's, I discovered what I had always suspected, but could never bring myself to admit. I could at certain times be a complete and utter coward. Somehow and from somewhere I mustered something that might be called courage, but also desperation. The thing continued to rage and snarl, but I continued to thrust the lantern at it. Its head swayed and ducked to avoid the brunt of its light and heat. Then something amazing happened. The creature began to back away. It actually moved backwards, flailing its arms in the air in a fiery fit of rage. And now, perhaps, fear. It showed fear, and I fully intended to exploit it in order to survive. I continued to move forward with the lantern, repelling the beast, driving it closer and closer to the side of the ship, where perhaps, with any good fortune, it could be forced over the side and into the sea. Closer and closer, moving together, it and I, my fear, anger, and anticipation mounting exponentially with each step taken. Then I saw that I had clearly met my objective. We had come to the edge of the ship, and I felt the victory already mine. Just then, at the pinnacle of my conceit, the thing bolted, knocking me windlass, but worse still, casting down the lantern onto the sun-brittled deck. The flames spread with remarkable rapidity, and I found myself instantaneously immersed in a wicked cauldron of my darkest nightmares, all realized and the entire world set ablaze. The fire, it seemed, was the perfect remedy for my dilemma, for I quickly discarded my confrontation with the creature and sought the escape and refuge of a lifeboat. I found one, still secured, and I lowered it into the water. But before leaving the ship, I hastened to grab a seaman's pack and then leapt into the sea. That is it, my story as it actually unfolded. I know not what became of the strange thing which haunted us that day, nor can I be certain of the fate of Captain Wells and his noble command. But I know that my testament and account of all of these events is true and accurate. You and all of history will be the judges of its final worth. As for myself, I continue to drift. I believe that I cannot be far from one of the islands of the coral reef. Now and again the cry of gulls reaches my ears, and this renews the promise of salvation and hope. And now the sun is setting on another day, but on this night my vow with fate must be broken, so that sleep, sweet, beautiful sleep, will find me. On summer nights, when the heat lay like a woolen blanket over the Ozark forests and wrapped the hills with humidity, Grandmammy would sit on the front porch where she smoked, staring out over the fertile valley and sloping fields that led to the river. If it was the dark of the moon, she would tell funny stories and laugh with us. A crescent or half moon filled her with nostalgia. Her tales on those nights came from her childhood, but it was different if the moon waxed full. A full moon above the woodland is a majestic sight. The moonlight silvered the tall trees and made the rocks shimmer with that almost ghostly light, but I never found it beautiful because a full moon upset my grandmother. She was a brave woman. I've seen her kill copperheads with nothing more than a large rock or the sharp edge of her hoe. I once watched a tornado dance a destructive path across the valley, uprooting trees in its wake, and she did not flinch nor even seek the safety of the root cellar. She feared little, but the full-bellied moon struck terror into her heart. I did not understand why, not for years, but I knew, as did we all, that on nights when the moon was full she would turn maudlin and might weep. On those nights, despite her fears, my grandfather would always leave. I thought he went coon hunting, a common enough pastime in the Ozark woods, until I was about 10. I noticed that he did not take the hounds, Lucky and Shep, along, nor did he take his gun, and his buddies did not come to meet him on the ridge. I asked just once where he went on those bright nights, but Grandmammy made me no answer, and I lacked the courage to ever ask again. Her eyes held such agony, her mouth twisted with distress, and I could not question her about Grandpa's whereabouts again. I was there on the farm, more often in summer than in winter, but I recall that on those December nights when the moon swelled full, that Grandmammy huddled in a corner of the large living room, the television turned low. Although she stared straight ahead, she was not watching the fuzzy, snowy picture on the screen, nor was she gazing at the Christmas tree, a cedar cut down in the hills and carried in to be decorated with popcorn, paper garlands, and a tin-foil star. She always put me to bed earlier than usual on nights of the full moon, no matter how much I protested. In the summer I lay awake long into the heated dusk and wondered where Grandpa went, but in winter I curled beneath the quilts and slept, no matter how early she sent me upstairs. I may seem dense, but I never made the connection to the full moon and his absences. During the other moon cycles, he was a good grandfather. I toddled after him as he did his farm chores as soon as I could walk. He took me swimming on steamy summer afternoons down at the river, in the wide bend everyone called the swimming hole. I learned to float and later to swim there, in those cold, clear waters. On occasion, a snake might swim past, but I wasn't afraid. He loved homemade ice cream, Lucky Strike cigarettes, and wore faded denim overalls. He was a farmer who tended to his cows, a father who raised his 6 children with a firm hand and loving heart, a husband who provided for his bride for almost 70 years. And he was a werewolf. Saying the word, even now, is very difficult for me. It is hard for me to match the man I loved so dearly, a man I modeled my life after, with the wild, snarling beast he became when the moon grew full. I might never have believed it but for the thing that happened, what I saw myself, and what I experienced. I was no longer a child. I was a man, married with a 2-year-old son and another on the way. Although I was not a farmer by trade, I had become an officer of the law, a highway patrolman with the state police. I was building my life on the foundations Grandpa built for me. Although past 90, he was still alive, and so was Grandmammy. They still lived on the farm, although the cattle were sold, and the fields would have grown up into brush if my uncle had not run his small herd into their pastures. As often as I could, I gathered my wife, Trinity, my son, Chase, and we went to the farm. Sometimes it was just a weekend visit, a brief trip back home, but on more than one vacation, we headed for the farm. Trinity griped because the farm was and is isolated. The old farmhouse lacked air conditioning, but the breezes that blew up the narrow river valley had cooled it for generations. Chase followed Grandpa as I had, and I did what I could around the farm to keep things up, fixing a fence, painting trim, and such. That autumn, my wife was 5 months pregnant with our second child, and she didn't want to leave the city for the farm. I had promised my grandparents that I would come, promised Chase that he would pick up walnuts in the October days, so my son and I came alone to the farm. Always before, I had made good time on the long drive out of Kansas City, but that Friday night I was running late. Because of a major traffic accident on one of the highways that feed into the city, I was late leaving my shift. By the time I arrived home, Trinity had supper ready, and already more than a little mad about my planned weekend trip, insisted that we eat before we left. We ate, and then we jumped into my pickup truck, another thing in which I aped Grandpa, and headed south. Dark fell long before we reached the Ozark Hills, but I didn't mind. A full harvest moon, orange as the pumpkins we would carve at Halloween, rose and illuminated the highway. It lit the countryside that we traveled through, and as I came down the long drive that led through the fields to the farmhouse, it bathed everything with a rich light. I will admit that I had all but forgotten Grandmammy's strange preoccupation with a full moon. Somehow our visits had been through no design in other parts of the lunar cycle, and so I thought nothing of the full moon. I admired, in fact, how lovely the farm looked in that light, how the farmhouse rose from the earth like something out of a Currier and Ives print. Chase was asleep, snug in his car seat as I rolled my Silverado to a stop around the back of the house. Several of the downstairs windows were alight with a cheerful glow, and I didn't realize that anything was wrong until Grandmammy rushed out of the back door. "Henry's not back!" The words burst out of her throat. She did not bother with a greeting. Past 90, she moved with slow steps most of the time, but that night she moved with the speed and grace of a much younger woman. "He went up into the woods 'fore dark, and he isn't back. You best get inside now." Worry crawled up the back of my neck. At 95, there were many things that could have happened to Grandpa, and none was very pleasant. As I mentally berated myself for not doing more to limit his activities around the farm, or urging them to move into the nearby town, I fumbled for the words. "Let me carry Chase in, and I'll go find him." I was not eager to go into the woods and search, but I saw no other alternative. Although I would be able to see with the moonlight in my service flashlight, I was worried about any lingering copperheads coiled on rocks to catch the fading warmth of the day. I was also, to be honest, afraid of what I might find. In my career, I've seen many dead bodies, most mangled in vehicle accidents, a few killed in cold-blooded murder. I'd faced death long ago, and while I didn't enjoy looking it in the eye, I really did not want to find my grandfather's body in the woods. I was about to suggest that we call for help from the local sheriff when Grandmammy spoke. "No!" That single word fell hard between us. "No, Greg, you won't. You'll come in this house and we'll lock the door. You can't go after him, not now, not after dark has fallen." Although I had believed her to be of sound mind despite her advanced age, I wondered if I had been wrong. As I unstrapped my son from the car seat and carried him into the house, I questioned her. "Don't you want me to go find him? He may be sick or hurt or—" "No." She shook her head back and forth with force. "He may well be, but you can't go after him. Not until morning." "But he might be—" I didn't want to say the word. She had no such compunction. "Dead? Yes, son, he might well be dead by then, but if you go now, you may be as well. He's not dead just yet." I wondered how she could know, or think she knew, but then I stopped halfway through the back door as a strange sound rippled the still night air. The howl sounded angry. It sounded almost human, and yet something like a wolf. Perplexed, I looked at my grandmother. She, frail and feeble, took my son from my arms and said, lips tight, "I'll put the boy to bed and then I'll tell you what I should have told you before." I waited, uneasy, listening as her footsteps clumped up the stairs. I knew each creak of the floor, and it seemed like a very long time until she returned, winded. Her face had the harsh lines of a carved mask, something Native American or even African. As she settled down into her old armchair, she reached for a cigarette. "Grandmammy, you quit smoking years ago." I was shocked. She'd given up smoking after her 70th birthday. Her aged lips clamped tight on the unfiltered Lucky, and she lit it with a match. "For what I have to tell you, Greg, I need a cigarette. You won't believe me, but please don't think I'm a crazy old woman. What I'm going to tell you is true." Her smoke made me cough as I asked, "What is it?" In her matter-of-fact, everyday tone, she said, "Henry's a werewolf. Been one since he was a boy of 12. It's a secret I've carried for many years, and a secret I hoped never to tell anyone." I could not believe her. A werewolf? Please, I thought as I tried to banish the image of a late-night movie where an old gypsy woman warned a werewolf. "Oh, Grandmammy." I thought I understood now. She had lost her mind, and I tried to find a plan that would both help her and find my grandfather. She shot me a look that curdled my heart, a hard, knowing look I'd never seen on her face before. "I knew you wouldn't believe me, but it's so. I knew when I married him. He told me the night before we wed, but I loved Henry, and so I married him anyway. I moved here to this farm, and 'twas his own mother taught me what to do when the spells come on him. His daddy had made a place in a cave up on the hill, a place where Henry could go and shut himself into when the moon was full. When he was a little boy, they locked him in, but by the time I knew him, Henry put himself into the cave. At first, his daddy was the one to go let him out in the morning, but soon it was me. I've done it for all these years, rain or shine, wet or cold. I could not imagine that there was a cave on the farm. I knew, or thought I did, every foot of the woods and the farm. I played along, though, to buy time so that I could help my grandparents. "Then he isn't locked up tonight?" Her sigh echoed in the room, and she blew smoke out of both nostrils with a snort. "No, he's getting slower these days, and he wasn't out of the yard yet when the moon rose. I ain't watched him turn in years, but I saw him tonight, changing from a man into a werewolf. If you don't believe me, his clothes lay on the ground out by the little barn. You heard him howl, same as me, didn't you?" I was cold, colder than I'd ever been, and my hands trembled. She made it sound so possible, so plausible, but I couldn't admit the truth. I heard a coyote. It didn't sound like a coyote, though, but it must be. There were no such beings as werewolves, and if there were, Grandpa could not be one. Nope, you heard Henry. He's out there running wild in the woods, howling and doing God knows what. He may kill some stock, I hope no more than that, because he's a beast, a raging beast. No man can stop him tonight, not unless they have a silver bullet. I looked around the comfortable living room I knew so well, and it had not changed. The same vintage furniture, that hurricane lamp she had always had, and the prints on the wall had faded, but were the same I remembered from my childhood. Yet everything I knew and believed had changed, and I realized nothing would ever be the same again. In that moment, I felt out of kilter, so out of sync with life that I wanted to scream, to howl myself like an animal, and in that moment, I began to believe that perhaps my grandfather could be a werewolf after all. If someone stops him, won't they kill him? I had to know. Yes, but he may have to be stopped. I've always known that. 2 tears, one on each side of her face, rolled down toward her chin, and I wanted to cry myself. Grandmammy, I'm beginning to believe this crazy thing, I told her. But I have to know how he became a werewolf. She lit a second lucky strike from the end of the one she had smoked down to the butt. I asked myself years back. When Henry was a little boy, he liked to prowl the woods, sometimes at night. He come home one night saying a wolf bit him. That was around 1920. His folks cleaned the wound, washed it out with whiskey, and thought he would be fine. Biggest worry they had was rabies, but when the moon come full again, he turned into a werewolf. I listened, feeling like I must be having a nightmare, that I would wake up back in the townhouse with Trinity beside me. But the smell of the tobacco smoke, the feel of the rump-sprung couch under me screamed reality. It was true then, a terrible truth, and I wondered just why Grandmammy had told me. Then I realized that she had been worried about chasing me, afraid in case Grandpa roared out of the dark to bite us or even kill us. Her fear was born out of love. You were worried he might attack us, I said, hating each word as I forced it up my dry throat. We're safe now inside the house with you. And Grandpa, he'll be all right in the morning, won't he? I should have known that there would be more. Something else even more terrible than the bare knowledge that my beloved grandfather was a werewolf. But I did not, and I wasn't prepared. No, he won't, Grandmammy said. Another undulating howl outside, close enough to make the window glass tremble and raise the hair on the back of my neck. He would have been if he'd got to the cave in time, but since he ain't, he'll smell our blood. He'll come for us, Greg, unless you stop him. My mind froze, blanked out, and I stared at her, unable to comprehend what she asked me to do. When I understood, I began to shake, to tremble, and to feel a rising nausea twist my stomach into knots. My grandmother, a strong woman, who had succored me and given much to my raising, was asking me to kill my grandfather. If I hadn't already been certain, the sight of the single silver bullet she pulled from her pocket would have convinced me. I rebelled against the idea that I could kill the grandfather that I had loved, shoot him through the heart with this absurd silver bullet, and told her, I can't kill Grandpa. I can't. You've killed before. Her tone was no nonsense and firm. And God help me, she was right. I'd shot 3 perps in my career. One, a drug-crazed man who threatened to kill his infant daughter. Another, a man who rushed me with a knife on a dark road. And the last, a young man who had shot the man who had hit his wife's car head-on and then turned to shoot me in his grief-induced insanity. Those deaths were in the line of duty. The dead were strangers, and I had shot to defend myself. Killing my grandfather was something quite different. I have, but it's different. Grandmammy rose, her aged bones creaking as she pulled herself upright. Her gnarled, worn fingers pushed the bullet into the palm of my hand and wrapped my reluctant fingers around it. No, it's not. He will kill me, kill you, and kill your son before he's done. The bloodlust is on him now, Greg, and he won't stop. He may be an old man in life, but he's powerful strong as a werewolf. Grandpa would want you to kill him before he hurt any of us. You know that, and if you don't, well, we talked about it some years ago. I can't. Even as I spoke, I realized that I could, that killing him would be as much an act of love as defense. I thought of my small son upstairs, his tender body that would crunch beneath the werewolf's fangs, and I steeled myself to do what must be done. Better to end Grandpa's long torture as a werewolf now than wait until one of us lay dead. Better to kill him before he might make my son another werewolf. My revolver is in the car, I said, my words choking up through repressed tears. I'll get it. Grandmammy nodded. Best load it right off in case you need it. 1,000 stars sparkled overhead, paled by the strong light of the full moon. I reached into the truck and grasped my weapon, chambered the silver bullet, and turned at the sound of something large running. I cannot call that thing Grandpa, came out of the woods. A tall, strong beast, at least 7 feet tall. Thick, coarse, dark brown hair covered the body. The mouth snarled at me, growling, and I saw the teeth, terrible fangs stained with rich red blood. As it jumped at me, lunged toward me, I aimed my weapon and fired one shot. I did not miss. I'm a noted sharpshooter, and the shot found its mark. At the moment of impact, the creature screamed, a horrible, anguished sound that made my blood run cold. Tears slicked my cheeks, and I realized that I cried out too. My wordless cry of grief, of pain, of terror came when the yellow eyes altered, shifted, and became my grandfather's familiar brown eyes. I watched as the fur faded, leaving a naked old man's body, gaunt and pitiful in the moonlight. He was dead, and the rest of the truth came to me then. I would answer for this in the bright light of day, for shooting my grandfather through the heart, and no one would ever believe what I knew was true. He was a werewolf.